Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Lisa Bildy. Lisa is a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom in Canada. She's focusing mainly on civil liberties, and she was the person I believe who spearheaded the Stop SOP, which was the statements of principles that the Law Society had put in, which was kind of like a quasi social justice stuff. All right, Lisa, thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So yeah, so I mean, I think we both followed James Lindsay, and that's how I kind of got to know you on Twitter.
hmm
Um, and you're doing something that's, like I really, it's like any dog I've had at any fight, it's basically like free speech or freedom of expression. So what you're doing kind of like, it kind of lines up with what I think about. So if you want to, like, how did you get started in this? Where'd you come from it? And then we can go from there.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think I probably had a bit of a weird background for a lawyer. I was a trial lawyer for a number of years. I did personal injury and family law and that sort of thing. And then, just a very career-oriented woman, working my way to the top of the heap. And then all of a sudden I had kids and had a paradigm shift. And then strangely enough, this was completely out of character. I ended up staying home with them. And then school wasn't a great fit for various reasons. So I ended up homeschooling. So I was away from practice for a number of years. And as the kids got a bit more independent with their studies, I had time to kind of watch the social justice, the culture wars unfold, and started to see patterns and get kind of intrigued with the topic, and it still sort of felt like it was all just on Twitter and nowhere else. But as I was gearing up to a return to practice, and this was about 2017, it sort of did hit home on a very personal level. The Law Society, I started paying more attention to what the Law Society of Ontario was doing. And by the way, just for listeners who may not be in Ontario, this is the regulatory body for the legal profession in our province. And there are about 52,000 lawyers, and we're all regulated by this body. It decides whether we're competent to be lawyers, decides whether we get to have our licenses to practice. So they have a lot of power over the profession.
So is it like kind of like the equivalent like of a bar association in the States?
I think it's a little bit more, it's more regulatory. The bar associations, I think in the States, tend to not regulate the profession. They are more of of a professional lobby group maybe, or they bring lawyers together, but they don't necessarily regulate them. That could be different in some states. I'm not entirely sure,
Okay.
but certainly in Ontario, they have this role as protecting the public interest by regulating lawyers. So, and they, as such, they're an arm of the state. They're given this responsibility by statute, and so. So that means that our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which kind of keeps the government in check, also applies to the Law Society as a government agent. So I guess probably about October of 2017, I started paying attention to things coming out of the Law Society, and an email came around which said that we all had to prepare a statement of principles expressing our obligation to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion in all aspects of our practices, our personal lives, even if we were in retirement. And I thought, wait a minute, wait a minute. First of all, you can govern our conduct, but since when do you get to tell us what our principles are? I mean, our principles are things that we arrive at, most of us, through years of self-examination and experience and reflection, and we decide what our own principles are. We don't need the Law Society telling us what they are. So it was around that time that a law professor by the name of Bruce Pardy put a piece in the National Post saying, likening the Law Society to North Korea, basically. And that got people talking a little bit. But, lawyers, we're busy. Nobody's paying attention to all these emails coming in from the Law Society, unless you're getting that little white envelope marked personal and confidential, which suggests maybe you've got someone complaining against you. By and large, you're ignoring the Law Society. So people had not been paying attention to this issue really at all till Bruce's article in the National Post. I saw that. I saw Jordan Peterson and Bruce and a lawyer by the name of Jared Brown do a little talk on sort of a call to arms for the legal profession. And so I was already concerned about these issues. So I wrote to a bunch of my still law colleagues that I had. I mean, I wasn't completely out of the profession while I was homeschooling. I was doing a lot of contract work and so on. So I still had contacts, and I wrote to them all, and I said, I'm very concerned about this. I don't think this is the direction the Law Society should be going in. The measure has already passed, but I think we need to speak up about this. And one of my contacts was on the Middlesex Law Association. That's just a group that's of local lawyers, basically, in my community. And he said, yeah, I'm concerned about this too. Let's have a meeting. So they had a meeting to discuss it, and I stood up and spoke. And by the way, I should say this is a little out of character. I was not necessarily a culture warrior or somebody who liked to rock the boat. I mean, it was actually nerve-wracking to stand up. I didn't know what other people were thinking about it. It felt like, there seems to be this broad consensus that we all have to agree, and I knew that my opinions would probably be, offensive to some.
But also, it's the language that it's couched in, right? You're opposed to diversity. You're opposed to inclusion. Like, how can you be opposed to diversity, right? Like,
exactly.
It's that stuff, and it's. Just a little aside here, like the way that social justice, or like what James Lindsay is calling now critical social justice, like how it takes the language and a word like diversity no longer means what the common parlance is, right? They've turned it into a jargon, and they expect everyone to know what that jargon is, and they are assuming everyone uses it as it's that jargon. So when you speak out against it, that's this thing. Like, well, how can you be against diversity? Or if it's the anti-racism, like, don't you want to stop racism? Like, it's,
Yeah, well, I'm not even sure that they do want us to know what they really mean. I mean, I think that the language is sort of purposely kind of obfuscating, right? Like, how can you be against equality? Okay, well, but they present it as equality. Everybody
but they say equity,
gets the same opportunity.
They say
but
equity.
They really mean equity. But they, they're slippery about that, right? So, that's a big issue. What do the words actually mean? And most people who aren't really thinking about this or immersed in it all the time hear those words and think, how can you possibly be opposed? There's sort of a natural inclination to be in favor of those things because they sound nice. Yeah. And so you must be a really horrible person if you have any doubt about this at all. Anyway, I stood up at this meeting, and a few other lawyers were concerned too, and we ended up meeting together afterwards, and we decided we were going to try and alert the rest of the profession to this. We put together a website. It was a statement of principles, SOP, so we called it, we just picked the stupid name, StopSOP. But honestly, over time, over the progression of this movement, it became like it literally was a website, nothing more. Then it became a community, and then it really did become a movement. So it was sort of funny. It was like a hashtag on Twitter, and but at the moment, at that early stage, it was just an opportunity to alert people to what was going on. So we got this website put together. We put a few articles together on our concerns, some frequently asked questions, links to some other articles that were starting to be written about it. And most importantly, we put together, we added a page where people could publicly state that they were opposed to this. Because we thought, everybody's out there in their own offices. Nobody knows if other people feel kind of, concerned about this. So we figured if a few people spoke up, that might encourage others to do so. And it did to a point. I put my name on there first, by the way, and I can remember the feeling of, my hand hovering over the mouse. Do I click to put my name out there to say I'm opposed to this? It was actually very daunting. And as we learned, a lot of people were extremely fearful to speak out against this. It was incredibly stifling and nerve-wracking for people. And I think by the end of the campaign, we had like 350 people who would put their name out of 52,000 lawyers. So anyway, we learned very quickly that was not going to change the course of history to have a few lawyers speaking out against it. So we were then about a year out of the next bencher election. Benchers are the quaint name for the governors, basically, of the Law Society, and they're elected from amongst the profession. So we thought, well, let's put together a slate of candidates who are prepared to stand up against this. So we built this little team, and I guess because I wasn't fully working yet, I had the time, so I was pulling together people who were reaching out to us, and from that list of 350, we held a workshop, invited them, and managed to cobble together a slate of 22 lawyers and one paralegal, and all of whom were agreed that this compelled statement of principles had to go. And we launched a campaign. We sent out emails to the profession to try and educate them on the issues, tell them what these words really meant. We took a huge amount of heat and blowback. The hate mail was fast and furious that came back from those emails. It was me dealing with all of that. It was not so fun. We took a lot of abuse on Twitter from people who assume that we must all be racists and bigots and just generally horrible people. It was shocking, actually, because these were lawyers, right? You'd sort of expect that people could have a rational discussion. But anyway, what was interesting to me was, having come back to the profession after being away from it for a number of years, was how all of this has infected the profession so badly that things like evidence, the foundation of all of this was some report that they had commissioned, which found that there was systemic racism in the profession. And then these initiatives grew from that. But if you look at the report, you think, wow, it was poorly done, methodologically unsound, very self-selected, very motivated. There was obviously activists working behind the scenes, and it was a tiny number of people who felt that there must be systemic racism. And on that basis, we did this huge initiative to change the entire profession. So, I thought, well, lawyers are supposed to be all about evidence, but clearly not.
Yeah, okay. That's one thing I don't understand, because I came at this from a completely different angle. I got back to Canada in 2014, and that's when I started seeing all this insanity, and I was like, what's going on? And that's when I started looking into this stuff, right? I only really started reading the social justice literature, I guess, in about 2017. Because I didn't know what was going on, right? So I was like hit and miss here and there, and But then when I started reading this stuff, and then Derek Bell, like the first paper that basically they say is like the founding thing from critical race theory is, he's Harvard Law. Mm-hmm. Crenshaw, basically she had two papers that founded intersectionality, one in 88 or 89, and one in like 90 or 91. Right, so this all came out of law schools.
Yep.
And now, obviously, it's become its own their own fields now and stuff like that. But like I don't know if you've taken a look at the administration of the Law Society. Not so much like the members or the people who are in the profession or are a member of the body, but like the actual the bureaucrats, right? The paper shufflers.
Yeah.
Like, are they all like critical race theorists and stuff like that? And like, because you hear their language, right? You hear if it's technically true, it's still true, and so you have that saying, like, technicalities are the soul of the law, right? I mean, like, I still am trying to figure out that, like, how did it, because I could see like Derek Bell's paper, like the original paper that he wrote. I mean, he brought up some really important issues, and there were some very, very valid points in there. And then how it's being applied is where the problem is, I think. But it's just like I can see the justice aspect of it coming from a law school, but just the whole, like you said, getting away from evidence, getting away from, don't engage with that person because he's thinking the wrong way. Like, how does that come out of a law school?
Right. Yeah. I think it's been a very gradual process, and I don't remember it being. I mean, I went to law school 1990 to 93, so I think I sort of missed all of this stuff, which is why it was sort of shocking to me when I kind of jumped back in later to see how much that had sort of permeated through everything. The law schools are very different now than they used to be, and I'm certainly hearing a lot about that now. People are very afraid to speak out. I know James Lindsay has talked about this as being a sort of de facto religion, and it really does feel that way. It's very much an orthodoxy that you cannot go up against. And so, while there may have been valid criticisms of certain things, and in the process, though, other very important things are being undermined. I mean, there was an article in the Boston College Law Review about 20 years ago, which I just came across when I was getting into all this, because this was all new to me, as I said. So I had to do a lot of catching up. But it was a guy by the name of Jeffrey Pyle who wrote about critical race theory, and basically he said that it attacks the very foundations of the classical liberal legal order. So the idea that every person is equal under and before the law, legal reasoning, rationalism, the neutral application of principles under the Constitution. These things, the critical race theorists say, are mere social constructs that are supposed to that are there only to legitimate white supremacy or something, right? So all those foundational things that our entire judicial system rests upon in Western civilization are being attacked. And, so it's alarming. It's not just about some lawyers having to swear a statement of principles. I mean, this goes so deep.
Oh, yeah, no, this stuff, okay, it's the thing like white ways of knowing, right? And this comes straight out of critical race theory. It also comes out of like post-colonial theory, I think. It's that science and reason and logic are a white way of knowing, and they're not meant for people of color. I mean, it's the same thing that actual racists said, that we can't teach. But I mean, it's the exact same thing, right? Or okay, I've got in front of me, I've got a book called Acting White, and there's a chapter in it about how the Obamas weren't really black because they acted white. And to me, that reminds me of, you'd hear the term uppity, right? Oh, look at him, he's being uppity, or she's being, and it was like, oh, they're acting like they're betters. And I'm like, how are you people any better? And then, I mean, the whole thing of, someone sent me this article, and it's awesome. And I didn't know about this, and I'd love that this would be taught in schools. It was about this guy who lived in a cave in Ethiopia around the time of the Enlightenment, right? So as the Enlightenment's going on in Europe, and he's not connected to it, he has no clue about it, but in this cave by himself, he's coming up with ideas similar to Milton and Mill and Paine and Locke. Right? So these are not white ideas. These are universal ideas. And so all these people who say, like, they just had it at Stanford, I believe, where they got rid of the classics because it was too white. And they're, we don't. So instead of going out and finding other literature from that time, like, okay, bring me this guy's writings. I want to read them. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the stuff that you're complaining is not there. Go find it. Bring it to us. But why get rid of history? And it's just like, that's the part that just stuns me the most. Like, I don't like, there's just, it's mind boggling, like the way they think. And it is religious. Like, it's ISIS blowing up the ruins of Palmyra because it goes against Islam, right? No, get rid of everything from the past because it speaks out against our one true faith now.
Right. Yeah, no, it is totally. And I mean, you and I are about the same vintage. So, we probably grew up at a time when, people were actually like, I think, kind of following that MLK vision of, forgetting about all the racial stuff, right? You're friends with people because you like them and because you think they're decent people, right? That's how I grew up. I didn't care about what. So it was a weird world to step back in and go, oh, we have to be so conscious of this now. And it actually makes us more divided and more on guard with one another and suspicious of people's motivations. And it's all very unhealthy. And I guess that's the whole point. I mean, this is not meant to uplift us. This is meant to tear things down. And it's not just, I mean, it's religious, but it also has parallels like this. I was reading Václav Havel's piece, The Power of the Powerless. Shopkeepers, so he uses the example of the greengrocer putting a sign in the window saying, "Workers of the world unite," and what that sign meant. And it meant everybody who had that sign in the window was sending a signal. They were sending a signal to their superiors not to bother them, that they had fallen in line, and it sent the signal to people beneath them that they were virtuous, and that's how that statement of principles struck me as well. I mean, there was religious aspects to all of this, but it's a control thing, right? Like somehow the social justice stuff is designed to make everybody fall in line and not question. And when it starts coming from the top, when you start seeing your government get falling in line with this kind of stuff too, and imposing it and requiring people to have values tests and so on, it really strikes me as parallel to what Václav Havel was writing about in that piece. We're all putting the Workers of the World sign, Unite sign in our windows right now.
Okay, no, it's totally dogmatic. Like that, okay, religion is dogma, right? I mean, and I mean the faith-like aspect of it is, it's just another dogma, and I think they're borrowing from all kinds of it. Like the faith-like aspect to me is, so let's just take intersectional feminism, right? So the patriarchy is like the Calvinist idea of total depravity. So the whole system is patriarchal, right? So if you take critical race theory, the whole system is racist. So there's, you're going to be consumed by racism no matter what you do. You have to act in the way in which you're fighting it. Just like if you're a Calvinist, you have to act like an elect, and so that you can be above reproach, even though the whole system around you is trying to consume you with sin. So like that's the religious aspect of it. That's how I see that part of it. But yeah, it is a complete dogma. It's, believe the way we believe. You have to think this, it's like that Seinfeld episode where Kramer's doing the AIDS march and he's like, why aren't you wearing the ribbon? You have to wear the ribbon.
I know. You have to laugh at it. It's the only thing you can do anymore.
Yeah, but it's nuts. I mean, they don't give you they don't give you an edge, and they don't give you a chance to win, right?
Right. No, that's right. Yeah, and so you're everybody's having to fall in line with this narrow set of orthodoxies. Is totally the new religion, and you're punished immediately if you step out of line. So, which we experienced. I mean, if you're wanting to be a principled person and you believe in things like freedom of conscience and the ability of everybody to act as an individual in this increasingly collectivist society, you're ostracized, you're called all sorts of names, and this is what we experienced going through this campaign too. It was, and there was a time in my life when I think that would have really shut me up and bothered me, but I've just kind of crossed that threshold where it's like, what, this stuff doesn't stick with me anymore. I know who I am. I know the kind of person that I've become over many, many years of reflection and growth, and you calling me names, it doesn't change who I am. And so it didn't stop us. We marched on. And that was actually one of the important lessons in all of this that I think other people wanting to push back need to know. And that is, it's that old adage, sticks and stones, right? May break my bones, but you got to just ignore that stuff. You just got to push through. And if you can, if you do push back, and you got actually a ton of people behind you. You don't necessarily know about it until push comes to shove and they're voting or whatever. But there are a lot of people that you can rally around who are sick of this stuff. And the world doesn't end. You get called a bunch of names, and it's just it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, definitely. Like, speak out. Okay, obviously it depends on some scale and stuff too. I think the more famous you are, it helps and it hurts. Like, you can speak out, but you're going to draw a lot more hate. But yeah, I mean, like, speak out and stand up for your principles. Like, that's I don't understand where that's become a bad thing now. Stand up for your principles. Be ready to, like, I'm not saying take accusations, take attacks, but be ready to defend whatever your principles are. But that's the one thing that strikes me the most. Like, I mean, I left and it was, I disagree with you, but I'll defend your right to say it. And I come back and it's like, I disagree with you, and you have to be fired and never work again. And it's like, that's, to me, that strikes me the most.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, there are consequences more for some people than others. And yes, that cancel culture is frightening, and it does prevent a lot of people from speaking up. But if you're in a position to, if you're sort of immune to being canceled for whatever reason, you're self-employed or in my case, I wasn't working at that time, which is honestly one of the reasons why I felt like I had to speak up, because I knew that I didn't have staff relying on me. I didn't have, there were really no consequences. And so I thought I kind of have to, because if I don't, who else will, right?
Yeah. Okay. I want to touch on something you'd mentioned just right now, was the statement of principles, right? So you keep hearing it, or you kept hearing it from the Liberals in their last, their last mandate. It was like, oh, diversity is our strength. Like, okay, there's like certain key phrases like that was their response to all this. Now I hear that again. And I'm gonna just give this little caveat. Like I think they reacted very slowly. I think once they did started reacting, they were okay, like during this whole COVID thing. And now I think again they're slipping back. And I mean, obviously there was issues. We can get into all. I don't want to get into the weeds of all of the. But like I said, I think they were okay. I don't think they were fantastic, but I think they were okay. I think some of the provincial leaders were really good. But you kept hearing this one phrase from like all the health ministers, anyone who was speaking, like either be it Trudeau or Freeland, science-based evidence. And it was kind of like diversity is our strength. And it's like, I don't mind people saying variations of that. And like, yes, I want them to use science. But when I keep hearing that same phrase over and over and over, and they don't tell you what, they just say, this is what we're using, right? And obviously, no one can, like, if they give me the big details of this is this virus study and that, okay, no one's going to understand that. But a little bit more than science-based evidence. Like,
right. No, exactly. And given that, what we've been through in the last number of years where people are all jumping on bandwagons that, when you scratch beneath the surface a little bit, you kind of go, well, that isn't what it really means. And maybe people have no concept of evidence in some circumstances, but, it's very one-sided, we can get into this topic too, but all the gender stuff too, and if you speak out against that, I mean, that is the science that you can't possibly have, and it's all kind of, there's a lot of science that's very questionable, which a lot of people are saying this is the science. So then when they make those kinds of proclamations, as you just mentioned, if you've been following any of this stuff, you're naturally going to be a little bit skeptical about what it is they're relying on. So it's unfortunate in a way because it makes us all less trusting of true expertise on things, but at the same time, we've all kind of learned that when people claim to be experts, they don't necessarily they're not immune to ideology and to being sucked into certain ways of thinking.
Okay, and I've spoken to a couple of people about this, and I think that's like right now, especially like with everything that's going on with COVID, with everything that's going on with like you can get a million different interpretations of the same graph, right? The Academy did this to itself. The press has done it to itself, and to some, to a decent part, all governments are doing this to themselves, and people don't have a trust in expertise anymore, or they only trust experts that say what they want to say, right? And it's just we don't know who to believe. Like we don't know, Sweden's doing a great job. Okay, yeah, compared to some other places, but if you compare it to the other Scandinavian countries, it's doing awful, right? The U.S. has tested more people than any other country. Yes, numerically, but if you look at per capita, they're like less than 0.5%. What do you trust, right? It's
right.
And
yeah, well, that's been the frustrating thing throughout this whole crisis is. You want, and this, I can't really blame anybody for this. None of us, it's a novel virus. So we're all kind of operating on limited and constantly changing information. And of course, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but I want to hear it all. I've been absorbing it all from all sides, and I can have my own conclusions on it, which change too as I see new evidence. But it's been, I think, extremely hard for everybody because, you keep hearing like, well, if we could have herd immunity, okay, well, that sounds great, except maybe people aren't actually going to be immune after they have it the first time. So, you can't reconcile all of that. We're also comparing apples to oranges in terms of how different countries record their death figures. Same thing with Sweden, with their approach, it would seem that they would likely have a greater number of deaths up front. So maybe you really can't analyze it properly until you've been 6 months or a year through the process. So it's frustrating for everybody, and we're making radical changes in our world right now without having all of that evidence. And so I think you're right that the governments have by and large tried to do what they think is the right thing. There's been a lot of public pressure for them to do these things, but that in itself is kind of to me a little bit disturbing and shocking too, is how quickly people are willing to throw away whatever freedoms that they have for safety, without even knowing how virulent this thing is.
Okay, staying on that. Okay, like I said, I'm a huge proponent of civil liberties, like Enlightenment values, but at the same time, I say that that citizens, residents, if you live in that country, right? Yes, you have the rights that your government should not take away from you, and your government should defend your rights so that no one other citizen can take your rights away from you, right? I don't think we'll disagree with that, but I think at the same point, you have an obligation to the state. Now, this thing was mismanaged from the start, and granted, this is all hindsight and whatever. I think what we should have done is what Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan did. And if there was a lack of masks, ventilators, whatever, right? If we weren't sure, because no one knew how this was going to go, right? But if the government came out and said from day one, look, we need to do this, this, and this, it's going to take us, 4 weeks to ramp up production on masks and ventilators and tests. For 4 weeks, we're going to ask you to stay at home. We'll figure out an economic package, whatever. Like, if they were upfront and straightforward, and they gave you a choice, like, this is what we're going to do, and we're asking you for this for 4 weeks because of this, 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 and this, and these countries are doing this, and they've done well, right? Like I said, I think most people would say, okay, you know what? They're not forcing you to, they're not doing it, they're asking you, and they're giving you logical explanations.
Right, exactly.
I think people would have gone along with that. But now, okay, and I think by and large in Canada, most people are, like, I go out for walks, everyone I see, like, if you're on the sidewalk, one person will go out on the street, one person will, and we're not getting harassed by the police. We're not. So I think by and large it's working okay. But in some places they're actually going out and, forcing the authorities to take drastic steps. Right. Which, I mean, I think, yes, you should have the right to protest, but you know what? Wear a mask and stand 6 feet apart. Right. And then the authorities shouldn't come in, fine. They're taking their steps. Right. So give them that leeway. It's like I said, we have to find a happy medium. Like, you can't just throw everything away, but at the same time, you have to have some responsibility to everyone else. I think you have to find a happy medium there. Right.
Well, I think you said it right at the outset. And if you can convince people that, these measures are important for all of us, I honestly think that that was probably all you needed to do, because most people were falling in line voluntarily before the governments even started locking down, at least here in Canada. Already people were working from home. They were not, they were canceling their vacations. They were, they were largely socially distancing. And you want to provide people with best information that you have and let them make informed decisions. But when you start getting then into, going from this is what you should do to this is what you must do, and we're going to start issuing tickets if you step out of line, then you start to lose the public support for what you're trying to do as well. And then you get the resistance building up. And that, I think most people can understand when there's an external threat that they have to rally around. Even if you're a libertarian, you recognize that, okay, under these circumstances, we do need to work together. But it comes down to, should you be forced by the state, and does the state have the ability to honestly do all the necessary balancing that's required to manage the situation properly? And that's kind of where I'm sitting at right now. Is I was certainly cooperative with the idea of staying home. We've quarantined ourselves. When my son came back from the States, we didn't go anywhere for 2 weeks. But when you start seeing that police are out there giving people tickets for ridiculous amounts of money for taking their kids rollerblading in an empty parking lot, this isn't helpful. This is not the kind of thing that's gonna get people, win the hearts and minds of people to cooperate. So, I mean,
okay, like Montreal, Mount Royal Park. So, like if you've ever been to Montreal, the mountain in the middle of the city, it's one giant green space, right? Mm-hmm. There are plenty of places there where you can go, and there's plenty of trails you can walk on. You can avoid people. You don't need to, obviously, I'm not talking about running a marathon through the mountain or something like that, right? With thousands of people, like, if you live in the city, there's plenty of places on the mountain where you can go, but like, oh no, you can't go there because you're going to get a ticket, right? I heard about something, it was like a local radio station in Montreal. A dad was out with his son and they're throwing a softball in the park across from his house. And he got a ticket for that. I'm like, like you said, no, let's treat people like adults. Say, this is what you need to do. And most people are doing that, right? Okay, yes, if you come up and there's 50 people having a big barbecue and they're, all like dancing and hugging or whatever. Okay, yeah, fine. That's wrong. Like you can go stop that. That's understandable. But like, a parent playing with their child, and even if they're not 6 feet apart, like, they live in the same house, they're just together. Like that shouldn't matter, like.
Yeah, well, you start to see, these are the kinds of things we've seen all through history, and we keep seeing them, and I don't think people change all that much. But when you start giving some people some power, some of them abuse it. And unfortunately, I think you see that when, I'm usually a very big supporter of police and the rule of law and all that sort of thing. But when you start to see that, they're not exercising, I think, appropriate discretion with some of these things, you start to think, okay, well, you're just getting a little bit power hungry. And same thing with you're hearing from the governors in the states, like the Michigan governor telling people they can't buy seeds or whatever. It's just, this is unnecessary.
Okay, and it's like, okay, I'm not a fan of Trudeau. It's like I cut him down all the time, and I've had the misfortune of actually having met the guy a couple of times. So
yeah, the hypocrite.
Okay, yes, okay, the hypocritical thing on Easter weekend, right? Now, within some reason, okay, the guy wanted to spend some time with his kids. I get that, right? But don't make such a big show about don't go with your family here. Okay, you know what? If you've been at home for 2 weeks and your family's been at home for 2 weeks and you're like an hour or so apart and you're driving to each other, you're not going anywhere else. You're going from point A to point B, and both of you being healthy for 2 weeks, I think it's okay on a weekend like Easter to go have a dinner together. Like okay, fine. Some people are going to hear this and go, "Oh my God, you're going to spread the disease," whatever. But I know people could be asymptomatic, but if it's been 2 weeks or whatever, right? But once he's made all that thing, and then the Quebec government too also shut down that whole Outaouais region. They said, "Don't come here." Right. So he specifically went to a place that was shut down by the Quebec government.
Right.
When he makes a big show of "Don't do this, don't do that," it's like, okay.
Right. If you're going to be a leader, you've got to lead by example, and he's been falling down on that a little bit for sure. But anyway, I guess because I work with an organization that's constantly on guard for government overreach, my spidey senses have been tingling a lot through all of this too, and we get concerned about the lack of consideration of other issues too. Like there's a balancing act that has to happen. As we have just shut down an entirely complex, interwoven society, and the government's making decisions about what are essential businesses and what aren't, and it's all fairly arbitrary. Why are like marijuana shops left open, but
okay, but I gotta laugh because there was this video with this Amazon worker, and I feel really sorry for this guy because these guys have been working hard, right? From warehouse, it's like, ladies, dildos are not an essential item.
Well, certainly not if you're going to Walmart, I guess, right? And they're blocking off certain sections. But yeah, I guess if you're buying them from Amazon, they are. I know, it's just crazy. And we need to be starting to talk about the impacts on other aspects of society. There isn't just this one thing. There are people right now, the hospitals are sitting largely below capacity from what I'm hearing, and people are not getting cancer treatments or other surgeries or treatment that they might need. So the balancing act that one would expect a government to do when taking such a it's incomparable that what we've just done. We've just shut down our society. But you got to balance that, especially when you're taking away people's freedoms to even step outside their houses and go and do normal things. So I'm not hearing much of that yet, and that's the problem when government is so big. It's very hard for them to turn on a dime and readjust things. I think they get a lot more buy-in if, as you said earlier, they said, okay, it's for this discrete period of time. These are the things that we're going to do to try and eradicate it. We want you to buy in on this, and then we'll start opening things up again. Anyway, it's just not it's not happening.
Yeah. Okay. And then the overreach thing. And we talked earlier, and like the email about this, the new proposed law about the misinformation. That's been my biggest beef with the Liberals. Like, okay, M103, granted it's a motion, but if you read the wording of it, and if you read the report that came out afterwards, there's no clear definition of Islamophobia, and there's I'm just afraid about legislation that's going to. They campaigned like in their mandate was like they said that they wanted to introduce harsher hate speech laws on social media, right? Mm-hmm. And then you had that guy talking earlier about the social media controls just before like COVID broke out. Mm-hmm. Now they're considering like banning misinformation. 2 weeks ago, misinformation would have been that there's a good chance that not that the Chinese made this and purposely used it as a bioweapon, but that they were working on it in the lab, like they were studying it, and escaped. Now, I'm not saying that definitively happened, but there's some indications that happened.
Right.
So, if I'm to discuss that, am I spreading misinformation? Am I going to be silenced by the government? This is the overreach that I really like. This more to me than the government saying, "Please stay home." This is what bugs me.
Right, I agree, and it follows a pattern, and that's why I think we always have to be concerned. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Right, So we've already had these trends in place for values tests from this government, and you can't get a summer job grant if you don't check a box saying that you agree with something completely outside of any relevance to the program. The statement of principles kind of thing is being replicated throughout society. We all have to agree to the same orthodoxy. We're the kinds of cases that we have at the Justice Center too, are foster parents, for example, if they don't share the exact views of the social workers, then they're not going to get to be foster parents. And so we have this orthodoxy that's being imposed all around, and I think that is what feeds into this government's desire to want to control the media narrative too. It's much easier if we all kind of agree on the same things and only hear the same information. But it's very dangerous when you start having governments that want to control the press. It's alarm bells should definitely be going off. We're not quite to the point of being China with the state media, but it's the same path. And so taking advantage of a crisis to try and again slip in this idea that certain information should not be heard, that the internet should be controlled, it's very dangerous. So they've been floating these ideas. People have been pushing back. They seem to back off again, and then sure enough, in the middle of a crisis, they floated again. So
yeah, and it's again, I've spoken about this book a lot. It's Kindly Inquisitors by Jonathan Rauch. I don't know if you've ever read it.
I haven't read that one yet.
Okay, it's he was really prescient, but he was talking about stuff in the 90s, so the religious right in the 90s, and then he talked about the fatwa against Rushdie in 89. But he called it the humanitarian attack on liberal science. And when he says liberal science, he means the Enlightenment. And this is what this is, right? Like, oh, well, we want to protect people's lives, so we'll stop misinformation about coronavirus. Now I understand someone like that. What the hell's the guy's name? Mercola. He's a snake oil salesman. He's like, yes, inhale peroxide. That will help you fight coronavirus. Yeah. No, don't inhale peroxide. Like, please don't. Like, it's going to damage your lungs. Okay, if that guy's selling that guy's, you have legal recourse already to put a stop to him, right? You can do that, but you don't need to give the government powers to shut down speech. And they couch it in that language, like, we're going to be anti-racist. We're going to fight misinformation. We're going to, don't you want to fight extremism? Don't you want to fight Nazis? Don't you want to fight whatever? And it's that humanitarian threat. And the liberals are really good at that.
Yep.
And when I say the liberals, I mean the Liberal Party of Canada.
Yeah. Right. But it comes from both sides too. I mean, you do see that there's this desire to kind of curtail that messy freedom, right? That is uncomfortable, I think, to both ends of the spectrum. They want to have control over people and what they're allowed to say and think, and there's this very sort of sweet spot right in the middle that's constantly being pressed from both sides, and it's really hard to protect it, right?
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. There is a the right wing. Like, I was specifically in Canada speaking about the Liberal government because they're the ones in power. Okay, but there is a definite right wing. I mean, look, Trump calling the media fake news, which I think the term I agree with the best is this guy Michael Malice. He says it's the mainstream media is factual, but it's not truthful. It's So like the whole Trump fake news thing, him threatening reporters, that's not, that's flies right in the face of the First Amendment, like especially the threatening, right? So yeah, they're people like Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk in the States, like they're right wing nuts. They're no better than the social justice idiots. So yeah, I mean like, but yeah, no, the government overreach in Canada, I was kind of focusing on the Liberals because that's who's in power right now. And in the States, I think they've got a double whammy because they've got Trump in power, and then they've got all these people bringing in this kind of stuff. Like Washington State has got an Office of Diversity. I hate giving out this number, but I think at the last count that I saw was 16 states K through 12 are teaching critical race theory, or they've got critical race theory going through their curriculum. We've got it in 3 provinces in Canada, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I mean, like in the States, I think you're getting it from both ends. Here, I think we have that because the government is left leaning. This stuff comes from the left, right? It's not liberal, but it comes from the left, and it's it's infused our government. It's infusing everything. So I think we're getting it from one side, and the States are getting it from both. But yeah, like, you got to be careful about attacks from both sides, and it's that Keats poem, right? The Second Coming, like the center cannot hold, right?
Right. Oh, I know, but it has to. I mean, otherwise, it all falls apart, right? So, that's why I think it's really important that more and more people try and take a stand, however uncomfortable that is, against these things. So after I finished with this StopSOP thing, then I joined the Justice Center because it was a natural fit to move on to fighting for freedoms there. And we're just going back to what's being taught in the schools. One of the first cases that I got when I joined last summer was this one in Ottawa with the school teaching grade 1 children that boys and girls don't. It's kind of insidious and pervasive as well.
Yeah, I mean, okay, and that, like, again, that's another one of these things. Like, oh my God, how don't you want their right to exist, trans people's right to exist? Mm-hmm. Teaching that, if the kids at that age, like you said, like maybe teach them. Obviously, you can't teach kindergarten kids biology, but you can talk about men and women, right? Like mommies and daddies or whatever. Like you can give a basic outline, and then you can build off of that if you want to teach it to kids. Like
sure. And you can suggest to kids that not everybody is going to be the same, and so we should be tolerant and accepting and kind, and you can teach not to bully. You can teach all those kinds of things without undermining the entire framework on which everything is built, right?
But then they put in that overreach there as well, right? Especially in Ontario. I mean, I don't know. Like, I know there's one case, and it's extreme, but I've heard of a couple other ones, small ones. But the one case I heard about was autistic kid in kindergarten walks out of, I think it was a boy who walked out of a girl's washroom. There's a substitute teacher in that day or something like that. She looked at the kid and said, "Oh, so do your mommy and daddy think it's okay that you're a girl?" And he's like, or no, did you tell your mommy and daddy that you're a girl? Something along those lines. He's like, no, I wouldn't. They'd get mad if I said that. Kid was taken away, spent, I think, 2 or 3 days with like Child Protective Services until everything was all resolved. And it's like, okay, no, the kid wasn't trying to transition, but they've given schools the power now where they decide, oh, this kid wants to transition.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's okay. You know what? If the kid wants to, if it's a boy and they want to wear dresses, let them wear dresses.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
If it's a girl and they want to, dress like a boy, let them dress like a boy. You don't have to say, oh, you're a boy, you're a girl, you're whatever. Like that's what you want to do it. And when you're older, decide what you want to do. Like you can support them without having to. I mean, I don't know. Like I thought I could fly when I was a little kid, for Christ's sakes. Like,
I know. Well, and it actually puts everybody back into very, very tiny boxes again, which is, again, it's the same kind of thing, with the racism thing. You dwell on it to the point where you're actually making things more racist than they were. And in the same way, you're pushing people back into very tight stereotypes of what it means to be male or female. And in fact, when we were already broadening those, and why don't we just continue to broaden them and accept that there are some men who are more effeminate and women who are more masculine. So this is another thing that I've been working on lately and commenting on is this idea that children inherently know whether they're male or female inside. It might be different than their body. And it isn't just gender identity. It's like they're conflating that with sex now. And it's so you're getting a lot of younger kids on a path to medicalization from a very young age, with parents not necessarily being involved or having any ability to have a say on all of that. We've only just begun to see some of the consequences of that with kids growing up a bit and realizing that they've made a terrible mistake in many cases. So this is another whole area that is just completely impacted by ideology, by people jumping on a bandwagon here without really thinking through all of the consequences. And it's quite frightening. And so another thing that the government did recently was it brought in a bill on conversion therapy.
Oh, God, yeah, this thing. And again, it sounds good if you just read the bill. Right? Uh-huh. If you, it's like a paragraph long, the little text that they changed, right?
So conversion therapy, yeah, I mean, that sounds horrible. You shouldn't be trying to convert people from, if they're same-sex attracted, you shouldn't be trying, nobody is putting electrodes on anybody anymore and trying to convert them. That isn't even happening as far as I'm aware. Some people are doing Christian counseling and so on, which is now encapsulated by this, but that would be voluntary. People would be wanting to go for that. They're not being forced. Mm-hmm. But all that aside, even if you think that even shouldn't be allowed, what they snuck in was gender identity. And so, in effect, what you're saying is you now cannot have any sort of counseling directed to change someone's gender identity for children. So where you might have had like Ken Zucker and his philosophy, which, by the way, was not against transitioning children, but he had a wait-and-see approach initially just to make sure that this was, in fact, the right answer, because in something like 85% of cases, most kids who are questioning their gender at a young age will settle into their normal, to fit with their biological body by the time they get through puberty. And oftentimes those kids are gay. And so what we're actually doing is getting them medicalized at an early age, because we're saying now with things like this conversion therapy bill that you can't you can't do anything to challenge that. You can't suggest to the child that maybe what they are thinking is that they're in the wrong body is wrong, or that just give it time and maybe in the end they'll end up being homosexual.
Okay, but
so it's very dangerous.
Yeah, and here you set up another catch-22 for doctors, right? Mm-hmm. If you let the kid go ahead and if you encourage them, say, yeah, you're in the wrong gender, you should go through the surgery, you should go through all that, right? Later on, the person realizes, okay, you know what, I was a mistake. I was just homosexual. Can they then sue that doctor for conversion therapy because they converted them out of being gay?
Well, they've actually put an exception right into these bills that medical alteration surgery is not included in that. So it's really it's kind of almost forcing people. As soon as a child says that they think that they're in the wrong body, it's almost forcing the medicalization process to occur. Like it's really concerning. You should be allowed to be able to take a child and to a therapist that you can take them to one that wants to put them on the medicalization path, but you should also be allowed to take them to one that promotes the wait and see approach and lets them kind of, explore things a little bit until they're older.
But I mean, okay, again, shouldn't you wait until the body's developed? And when they say that I don't think the science is anywhere near settled on this, except I think right now, the preponderance of the evidence would say you wait until the body develops. There's no way I can see them saying, the science is settled. And I mean, I've heard people saying that, don't worry, you can stop them. Once you stop them from taking the hormone blockers, everything will go back to normal. Like, no. I mean, if you start that prepubescent, like I saw this article the other day, and it made me wanted to throw up. It was her daughter transitioned into a boy, whatever. That's not the part, okay? And she was like, the daughter was like 15 years old, like, my trans boy is now gone through menopause.
Yes.
I'm like,
yes, I saw that too.
I'm sorry, like. If it's not whatever makes you happy, but I hope that girl or that boy now, whatever, has a good life and everything's okay. But at that young, just think, my 15-year-old boy went through menopause. It's like, okay, yeah, you're admitting from now on, they are never going to have children. What if 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, they want to actually, yes, they can adopt or whatever, but they want to have their own child. It's not going to happen, right?
Right. Well, there are some people speaking out against this, and I think that again, this is why you don't want to have some sort of imposed orthodoxy, because there are real consequences to people in only hearing one side of things. You have to be able to hear all the perspectives, and as much as the activists like to shut them down, some people have been very courageously speaking up, and so parents whose kids are what you would call experiencing a rapid onset gender dysphoria, where they were never ever experiencing any sort of dysphoria until they got to be, in an environment where there were other kids that were transitioning. So those parents are starting to speak out, usually anonymously now, but also those who are detransitioning, the ones that have gone through the process of either socially or medically transitioning, and are now in probably their 20s and are looking back and wishing that they hadn't. It didn't actually solve the problems that it was intended to solve. So you need to hear those voices. And it's not to say that there aren't some cases that are appropriately handled by a transition, but it's just that when you get an orthodoxy in place and everybody is only hearing one side, there will be people who are swept up in that and will have these life-altering consequences as children that they might not have had, and that were probably unnecessary if they were just going to grow up to be gay. I mean, the real conversion here, I fear, is of gay children being converted through this process. And a lot of this is why they're starting to become. And I'm not active in this area, so. But from what I'm reading, the LGBs are in some ways starting to split from the Ts in some areas, because the activism of the trans is actually harming in some cases the gay and lesbians.
Okay, I actually read something about this the other day, and it's I've seen the LGB Alliance in the UK, and then but something here recently was like, okay, it's actually the Q. Q comes from the queer theory, and the queer theorists are the ones that will say something along the lines of Pete Buttigieg isn't exactly gay because he does, even though he sleeps with men, he's not gay because he doesn't embrace his queerness, right? This stuff comes, and so
same kind of thing as all the other stuff. It's all
So like the extreme trans activists are using queer theory and gender theory, and it's that kind of stuff. It's again this critical social justice, and it's so someone who's trans, some people who are trans are opposed to this kind of activism too, because to them that they just see it as not what they were all about, right?
Right. So, no, you do see quite a few of those people who are speaking out themselves at great personal cost, because they have transitioned and they're largely accepted, as being of the the opposite gender, and they actually see this perhaps as being harmful to their own existence, right? So,
but the control of the speech, control of everything. I mean, it was like you mentioned Jordan Peterson. I mean, that's how I think most people got to know him, was Bill C-16. And I agree with his stance on that. I have some issues with, I think I have a lot of issues with him aside from the C-16 and the free speech stance. But yeah, I mean, like, the government should not compel me on how I should speak. And this idea of protected classes, like, I hate that idea of protected class. Treat everyone equally. Do not discriminate on any, and you can start making a list and say this list is not, comprehensive, right? Because if you make a list and like, oh, well, that's not on the list, then I can discriminate against that. But I mean, like, just saying you shouldn't discriminate against anyone and then making a separate set of laws. Like, there's one case that I don't remember all the details, and it's, again, shows the hypocrisy of this. I think it was in Calgary or it was in Edmonton. It was a Native woman who was holding up a sign saying "kill white people" or "kill white men," and she wasn't charged with a hate crime. She was told they were told that that's not a hate crime. I'm sorry, but because white is not a protected class.
Right.
But it shouldn't be based on protected class. It should be based on, are you discriminating against someone based on their race, their religion, their sex, their gender, their sexual, like sexual preference, whatever, right? Like, are you prejudicing? Are you prejudicial against someone based on something that they can't really control? Like, I mean, like, racial prejudice.
In terms of jobs or in terms of hiring and that sort of thing, okay, that's fine. You shouldn't be choosing somebody or choosing against somebody just because of their immutable qualities. But then you get into some tricky stuff, like with gender identity and self-identification. When people can opt into categories, they aren't so immutable anymore. Then it makes that whole scheme kind of questionable, right?
But I mean, also, like, okay, I'm a guy, full beard, whatever. Like, if I decided tomorrow that, you know what, I'm a woman or whatever, like I'm changing my gender. People who've known me my whole life, for me that I then get upset if they say he or him and, they slip, I shouldn't be able to take them to court for a hate crime for something like that. I mean, yes, people should try to address you the way you want to be addressed, all that. Something new like this, you have to give some allowances. You can't just expect it to like if you one day say, I know what people are going to say, oh, it just doesn't happen one day, but I mean, at one point or another, you're going to let people know that from now on, I was X, now I'm Y. And some people will go back to saying X every now and then, and you have to live with it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, right. And, compelled speech is, is one of those lines that governments ought not to be crossing. You shouldn't be telling people what they have to say. It's bad enough to tell them that they can't say something. It's even worse to tell them what they have to say. Yeah. You're being forced to utter things that you don't agree with. And I think this is really proving to be quite a controversy as between some feminists and the trans activists on this point as well. And it's been interesting to watch it from afar, but it has to be resolved in some way that, I mean, I view it as it's a battle of rights, and the gender identity piece is akin to kind of I'm sort of working this out in my own mind, but kind of almost a religious freedom, to view yourself the way that you want to be viewed. Okay, that's fine, but you have that freedom, but you can't necessarily force somebody else to have that same view, right? So,
yeah. I mean, okay, the Jessica Yaniv thing, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, I read the whole. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe there's probably there is a lot of nuance that I missed, but I read the whole decision. Mm-hmm. And at one point, the justice, whoever wrote it, talks about the OJ case, right? And in that one, they actually think they did like religious freedom versus trans rights. And people based on their religious freedom said, okay, well, according to my religious beliefs, I don't want to do this. And the trans rights trumped the religious beliefs. Now, I think there are certain times when you should be able to look at that, right? Like my right to say, like, if I'm a private citizen, do I have a right to say, no, I don't want to offer that service, right? Mm-hmm. You can have that discussion. Once you get the government trying to decide, like, weighing individual rights of individual people, I think that's when you get the authoritarian stuff happening, because, it's a really, really fine balancing act,
Right.
You don't want, like, oh yeah, my religion says I get to commit a human sacrifice every month. Well, maybe that religious freedom shouldn't be allowed. You have to look at everything there. And I mean, the Jessica Yaniv case, I mean, if that doesn't go to show you how gameable that law is, mm-hmm. like, I don't know what will.
Well, I think it did open up a lot of people's eyes to the, when you were talking about it, when Jordan Peterson first started talking about it, and others, it was sort of academic at that point. People were like, well, how can you just not be nice and just use the pronouns that people want to use and so on? And they hadn't thought through all the consequences. And some people could see it, for what it was likely to become. But the Yaniv case did, I think, bring it into sharp relief, right? That, this is what it means. It means that people there's no gatekeeper anymore. People can just say what they want, and based on their beliefs, they can compel they can compel you to to treat them the way that they perceive, and even if so you end up in this unfortunate conflict between sex-based rights and gender identity, which again wasn't well thought through. There have been people trying to get the gender-based analysis. You mentioned it earlier that the government wants a gender-based analysis now for every new law that's passed. Well, where was the gender-based analysis on C-16? Because that's a huge issue. You're telling women have sex-based rights under the law, and and there's a reason for it, right? Because women have historically been more susceptible to rape and sexual violence and that sort of thing. So they get to have their own spaces for certain things. Now, there's a whole argument about how far that should extend, and feminist views on sex-based rights may go a little far sometimes. But in this instance, I have some sympathy for the radical feminists who are saying, wait a minute, we have these rights, and if you can just identify to sex-based rights, well, it makes a mockery of the whole thing. We then don't have sex-based rights because we can't be alone in our change rooms as female-bodied individuals and be safe from somebody who's identified as female but continues to have the male body, right?
Or you have a rape shelter that gets defunded, right?
Exactly. That's just we're starting to see the consequences of all of this play out in very ugly ways now, and we haven't really figured out a way to resolve it yet, and we're going to have to. So I think that we have to the extent that there's a conflict between the gender identity and the sex-based rights. I think that the sex-based rights have to take precedence.
Yeah, but also like right now, right? Okay, I don't know if it was last year or the year before where Stats Canada stopped taking sex, but they used your like how you identify as your gender as like that's what they were using for their metric, right?
Right.
So with COVID, men are affected more than women. So what? If I identify as a woman now, do I have a better chance? Like, it makes no sense. Like, there has to be a point with that. And, okay, like our passport as well. If you want to have, a non-binary or whatever, no gender identity on your passport, go right ahead. I don't care. But you have to realize that, let's say you want to go visit, whatever, you're flying through Dubai, right? You're going somewhere and you're flying through Dubai. You can't go into Dubai because if they see that, they'll probably arrest you. Mm-hmm. Like, you have, like, it's great for the government to do that, but like I said, the unintended consequences, like, oh well, your flight got diverted because of whatever. You're in Dubai now. You try to leave the airport, you're arrested.
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know that's we've been. Maybe it's because we haven't had crises of great import that that have kind of brought harsher reality into focus for us. Maybe the pandemic will help. I know James Lindsay doesn't think that it's going to let up. It'll just carry on even worse afterwards. I saw some of his stuff on that. But you kind of hope that people start to just get a little bit away from some of the silliness. But, the differences between male and females in terms of the impacts of drugs, right? We're starting to realize that maybe women respond differently to certain drugs than men. And when you then start to say, well, okay, so there really isn't male or female, and that there are, again, consequences to that are going to play out in the medical field. So, it's...
Or, I mean, even the police thing. Like, the police have to do it like how the person identifies. So it's like, okay, if you're looking for someone and they look female, and you don't know how they identify because you haven't spoken to that person, then okay, female suspect, and the person says, no, I identify as a male. Are the police now responsible for committing a hate crime? Because technically under C-16, that's a hate crime, right? Or, I mean, I don't know the law well enough to say that. I think they give you some leeway there, but
Right. Well, and in fact, they have been starting to record statistics of crimes based on identification. So you're going to see that women are now committing more sexual assaults than they ever have based on that. So we haven't thought all of this all the way through.
Oh no, it's again, like, bringing dogma into government. Like, it's that, okay, you have to think it this way, right? This is what it is. This is the science-based evidence, and this is what you're going to listen to. And it's, this is the party line, and it's, whatever. Is it room 101? There are 5 lights. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you got anything else you want to talk about, or if there's anything you want to discuss, things you're working on, let people know where they can find you. I mean, I don't want to keep you too long. Yeah,
no, it was fun. We were sort of wide ranging there. I'm not sure we solved all the issues, but we certainly jumped around and touched on a bunch anyway. I just encourage people. There are lots of people out there talking about the critical theory and its impact on our lives, and I do encourage people to speak out. I'll just give you an example. The mom in the case that I was talking about with the little girl up in Ottawa, who was told that after she identified as strongly as a girl, that she was told girls don't exist. That mom used that as a stepping stone to start a website on gender identity and a resource for parents who were finding that all of this stuff was concerning to them, the rapid onset gender dysphoria, the things that were being taught in school, and so on. So individuals can make a difference and it happens when we get personally impacted often. But I do encourage people to, where they can, to stand up against against this stuff and speak out, and hopefully we can turn the tide together. If we don't just roll over and let it wash over us, maybe we can have an impact. In terms of where to find me, I'm on Twitter at LDBildy, BILDY, and you can reach me at the Justice Center as well. We've got some interesting cases there. If people are finding that the current crisis is causing infringements of their freedoms in ways that they think are inappropriate, you can reach out to us there. If you're getting ticketed or sort of being told that you can't gather in ways that are socially distancing, but that someone has decided. So, for example, church services, we've had, and this is going to be an issue for Ramadan as well coming up. I think a lot of churches have been trying to find ways to fulfill the requirements, but still get their communities together, maybe in parking lots, everybody staying in their car, that kind of thing, and that's getting shut down. So I just encourage people, if you're finding that your freedoms are being infringed in ways that are you think oppressive and not justified, then let us know, and we'll see if we can help you out.
Yeah, and that church thing, like just leave off on that. I mean, come on. Okay, I'm not religious, whatever, but they found a way to practice their faith. They're in their cars. They're not they're not interacting with anyone.
Exactly.
Like, that should be all right. Like, the police should have better things to do than to go ticket all those people. Like, it's ridiculous. Anyways, thank you very much for coming on.
That was fun. Yeah, thanks.
And thanks everyone. Please. Thanks everyone for listening.